Congratulations on this film. It was powerful and tragic, and it shed light on a story I've heard about, but didn't necessarily know a whole lot about. But that being said, I think the first obvious question for me is balancing your narrative with what happened in real life and being sensitive to the real people involved with this. Can you talk about achieving that balance and still making a story that works for like a consumer audience to come in and watch in the theaters?
Yeah, I think in this case, I had a very personal reaction to when the news broke,
Mhm.
and I had a very strong reaction. And then when they showed I think CNN, they showed the banner that said John Allen Chau, 26 years old. Something really hit me,
Yeah.
and it didn't sit well with me that I judged and dismissed John in 20 seconds. And it wasn't until I read Alex Perry's article in Outside Magazine where he got a window into John through Patrick, the father, that it really moved me, and it set me down this journey of, well, is there a way we can try to kind of connect with John's humanity, And so I think working with Ben on the script, the first thing you do is like, well, did this really happen? Did that really
Mhm.
happen? And I realized that's not the exercise, because John was a storyteller. He's left us his journal. He left us his social media posts. And the more important thing was, well, why? Why was he doing this? And I wanted to connect with his humanity. And it was very clear that, he was influenced by, Hollywood films and adventure novels. And I felt like, okay, let's honor in the spirit of his writing. Let's take it face value. But as we're filling in the gap and trying to connect with him, let's do the same process. And so it led us down this 2-year journey of trying to kind of not only connect with John's humanity, but building all these other characters with very different worldviews. And I think for that to all work, I needed a buy-in from a cast that was going to lean in and really kind of not only just show up and deliver the lines, but really develop these characters. And so, like, I would say 90% of what I would talk about with them was never on screen. It was about these characters. How did they get to this point? And it was a really, I would say, a very gratifying process to do that, because once the film gets going, you're going to have a procedural element, you're going to have an adventure element, you have all these things. But at the core of it, you have to have these human beings to feel something, to be able to connect with them.
I feel like you just answered it, but there's the painting that John references and wanting to touch it and entering Narnia of that ship. And I was just wondering kind of what was your motivating force or guiding light or North Star in that same sense. But it kind of sounds like you mentioned it was the humanity, but was there a resource or something that you could always call to that would reinform or give you new insight to how you were approaching the story?
Well, I think in that case, it was the article, and Alex Perry was my resource because he spent so much time with Patrick, the father, And I think reading his article, it really kind of hit me. It really moved me because I have a 16-year-old, and I think, with any parent, you just love your kids so much. You want to do everything for them so they don't feel pain. You want to do everything. You want to, you want to share your wisdom so that they can absorb it. But what I learned from this process is that, and also reading the article, is the kind of pain and how tragic it was in that I think Patrick was trying to do that, but he was trying to do that in a way where they just end up missing each other. And that's something that I'm much more conscious of with my son now, is to hopefully develop a relationship where instead of me imposing that, it's open enough that when he feels comfortable, he could come and talk to me. And I think it's things like that these discoveries on this film, though it took like 3 years for it to come to life, that's just one example of many of how we're able to kind of, I think, come to terms and find these characters and how they interact with each other.
I do have to say that was kind of my portal into the story too, is seeing Patrick as this immigrant father remind me so much of my parents, and our circumstances are so different, but that's exactly kind of the takeaway that I had, is like, I really hope I won't feel so lost when the time comes and I can and go to them as a resource. So thank you for that. I do want to talk about kind of the independent film nature of this because it's no secret that you've worked on blockbuster films and I do have to say, for an independent feature, this does have such a large scope and it looks so good. And I'm just wondering, what were kind of the challenges and triumphs in crafting this big story, given the limitations of like an independent budget and production?
Yeah, thank you. I think when I first decided to like we're gonna do an indie, my notion of it was like a gritty little like 6 people crew traveling around the world. But I have to be honest, I think the more we developed it, the more I felt like it needed to feel like a big Hollywood film because that's what inspired John, and I think that was the right way to approach this. So I had to kind of dig in and ask for favors from basically all these amazing people I worked with in the last 23 years from around the world. We shot this in 38 days in 5 countries.
Wow.
And for us to be able to do it the right way, I used a lot of things, not only from tent poles, but also just from TV, just the speed of it, And so, it embodied, I would say, every ounce of every relationship, of every drop of knowledge as a filmmaker to try to make this film be intimate, but also feel like it has scale.
Yeah, there's some stuff that's happening with the camera, especially that opening scene where it feels like I'm watching something out of a GoPro. It's like locked off on the boat, and then the chaos of like being underwater. I really liked those like visual cues to kind of the inner turmoil that Sky's character is going to be going through. But I would love to talk about Sky. He gives a great performance, and I heard physically he even lost 30 pounds in the role, just portraying like this arc, but. How did you see him change mentally, if there was a change in taking on this character and becoming John in this film?
I think with everybody, especially Sky, when we first decided, once we all got together on this journey, I said to them, I said, look, I'll give you one day. One day we can be cerebral. If you want to judge, you want to talk about anything, we get that one day to talk about, and that's it. And then after that, I need you to be the character. I need you to find your John. I need you to find your Patrick. I need you to find your Mira. And so that was kind of the process. And, to Sky's credit, he went all in, And I would say that, yeah, he lost 30 pounds, but it was within 3 weeks because we were shooting in Thailand. And by the time we got to London, he had to be the young John. So we shot kind of backwards. And, his commitment to not only just the physical aspect, but just mentally, but also just like having empathy and understanding of John. I'm just so proud of him. I think one of the perks in what I do is that sometimes if we're lucky enough, or if I'm lucky enough, I get to work with someone who is going to be amazing career, is going to be a star. And I feel like I got that with Sky.
Obviously, there's a perspective that you brought up about like you judge this story when you first hear about it, like who would do this and go to this island, but the idea that some people see him as a martyr versus an unhinged zealot, that was the phrasing I saw in the production notes. In the process of making this film, what have you learned about that kind of bias or that judgment, and how your perspective can change when just giving a little bit of extra time to like understand this person?
Yeah, I feel like I think everything, look, I grew up in the 80s, so everything was a lot slower. I think now everything's going so fast, sometimes it even, I surprise myself, like in the case of John, where I was so quick to judge and dismiss, and I think being aware, I now try very hard to make sure that I check myself, and that's something that, I as a family, when we get, at dinner, we talk about it. It is something that we're much more aware of. And I hope that with this film, because it is something that whether you go online now and you check out the story, or everyone has a very strong reaction. And hopefully this is just a small part of reminding us that, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and getting to know each other, to understand each other, is much more important than to dismiss each other.